see the light. December 9th, 2009. It's after midnight in Marietta, Georgia, a small city about 15 miles northwest of Atlanta.
Marietta is a suburb of Atlanta. It's about 45 minutes north of the city, and it's relatively quiet.
It's not a place where things happen. It's not, somewhere you expect to hear on the news as far as something going on, crime related.
But just after 2 a.m., a 911 call shatters the calm, cool night.
Hey, my homework, you got shot. I need an officer. Please come hurry up.
Responding officers race to the apartment complex, where the caller says he and his two friends have just been ambushed. When officers arrive, they find the caller, 21-year-old Josh McCarter, being comforted by residents of the apartment complex. The young man looks shell-shocked.
We were not really able to get a lot of information from him initially.
Josh points police toward a nearby unit, and officers approach with guns drawn. As officers open the door, they are met with a tragic scene.
There are two people lying on the ground. There's tons of blood.
One victim is dead.
He had blood coming from his head. It looked like he'd pretty much been instantly killed by a gunshot.
The other victim is alive, but critically injured.
He had a gunshot wound to his forearm and to his chest and back.
Police officers thought that they might be able to save the life of the second one.
With one victim dead and another's life hanging in the balance, police need to find out what happened, and fast. They'll soon discover how a woman in love became part of a twisted scheme that led to murder. Darshelle Arnold was a bright young woman with prospects for an even brighter future.
She's very intelligent, a person who has a zest for life. She was a high school graduate. She had a job at a call center. She wanted to move up the ranks.
With her career heading in the right direction, there was just one thing Darshelle was missing.
She wants a lasting connection. She was somebody that wanted and needed to be needed.
In the fall of 2007, Darshelle finally found what she longed for in 21-year-old Jarvis Butts, who she met one night through friends.
They have kind of hit it off. Just was very, very natural. She was interested and she's flirting.
They are drinking and partying and having fun.
Deep down inside, she saw the character of Jarvis. He captivated her.
Before long, the two became a couple. And Darshelle knew this was more than a good time. This was love.
There's a deeper connection. She had a piece of a man, and that meant everything to her.
She wanted to be with him. She desired to be with him.
He was fulfilling something within her that she had desperately needed to feel secure and loved.
A year later, Darshelle and Jarvis's relationship had moved to the next level. They had become a family of 3.
So much joy, so much new energy, new life. They are living together. It was beautiful.
Darshelle and Jarvis were ecstatic. They couldn't wait to see what the future would hold.
She had a man who she cared about very deeply. and they brought a child into the world together. So their relationship was solidified.
It wasn't long, however, before the financial demands of family life put pressure on the young couple.
For them to have a child together, live together, and to try to function as a family, that's a huge undertaking for even more mature, stable people.
Despite their efforts, Jarvis struggled to find regular work.
Jarvis didn't necessarily have all the things that Darshell had going on.
He did whatever he had to do, doing whatever odd jobs he could to support his new family.
But in December of 2009, the couple came up with a solution to help lessen their financial burdens. They asked their best friends, Joseph Brown and Rolanda Fripp, to move in with them and split the rent.
Rolanda Fripp and Joseph Brown were also going through a rough time financially.
So obviously, more roommates, more money in your pocket. So they decided if they could all live together, they could just split everything right down the middle.
It seemed like the perfect plan.
They're kind of functioning as one family unit.
Darshell and Jarvis, along with their baby girl, were finally back on track. Though Jarvis still struggled to find steady employment, the couple was more committed to one another than ever.
He offered other things that were more important to her than money. Jarvis was bringing emotional support and some romance to the table.
But soon the couple's hardships would come to a head. And Darshell's desire to keep her family together would ultimately cost her everything.
This love, this desire to have a better life didn't go as planned.
Marietta police have responded to a frantic 911 call from 21-year-old Josh McCarter. Josh tells police that he and his friends were attacked, and his two friends were shot in the scuffle.
His friends were identified as 27-year-old Chris Jackson and 28-year-old Mark Jones.
They found Mark dead on the scene. However, there was still hope for Chris, and he was sent to the hospital.
As Chris fights for his life in the ER, detectives arrive to process the scene.
It was an abandoned apartment. It was vacant and unsecured.
The floor is covered in garbage. It's just filthy.
Detectives take a closer look at their deceased victim.
Jones unfortunately suffered from an execution-style gunshot wound to his head.
Not far from the body, detectives discover shell casings.
We noticed that there were two .380 caliber shell casings laying on the floor.
As detectives continue to comb the scene for evidence, they receive word that their second victim, Chris Jackson, did not survive his injuries.
Unfortunately, due to the nature of the injuries internally and the blood loss, he died while being transported for medical care.
This is now a double homicide case.
The stakes are much higher. I owe it to these families to figure out what happened.
Detectives don't find any additional clues at the scene, but they do have one huge lead: the surviving victim who called 911. When police interview Josh McCarter, they'll uncover a sinister plan, perpetrated by a woman willing to do anything for love.
All he can say is, the girls, they set us up. The girls set us up.
– 21-year-old call center employee Darshell Arnold was trying to build a life with her boyfriend, Jarvis Butts, and their infant child.
She genuinely love this man. He says no one else matters except for you. And that can be intoxicating for a woman.
She wanted to please Jarvis. She wanted him to be happy.
The couple had been struggling to make ends meet. But when their friends Rolanda and Joseph moved in, things started to get better.
It seemed like they're going to be okay financially. They don't have a lot, but they have enough to get by.
Darshell was determined to create the life she always wanted with Jarvis.
Darshell was doing everything for her man, and that means keeping a good house and taking care of the child and bringing money home.
But just how far would Darshell go to provide for her family and keep her man happy? Marietta police are investigating a double homicide at a vacant apartment. With little evidence on the scene, police hope the only surviving victim, 21-year-old Josh McCarter, can offer some leads.
We have transported him back to headquarters so that he could be interviewed to get as much accurate information as quickly as possible.
Josh is saddened to learn that neither of his friends survived the attack.
These are people that he cares about. These are his buddies.
They all seem like good guys. They're friends from way back when. They had a good relationship with each other. This is a devastating loss.
Detectives gently ask Josh to walk them through what happened in the hours leading up to the attack. Josh says he had been out for drinks with Chris and Mark at a local bar. Then, around 11 p.m., two attractive women approached them. The women introduced themselves as Rolanda and Darshell.
They are flirting with the guys, dancing. They're having just a lot of fun.
Josh says he and his friends showered the women with attention and spared no expense at the bar.
These three guys spent the rest of the night buying them drinks and flirting back.
Josh continues, telling detectives that the women wanted to keep the party going after the bar closed.
The girls said, "Hey, you want to come over to our apartment?"
Just after 1 a.m., the group arrived at what Josh and his friends thought was the girls' apartment.
Josh says the ladies actually go in first, leading the way, and then Mark and Chris in front of him, and he's the very last one to go inside.
He immediately knew something was wrong. He looked around. The place was abandoned. He knew that was nobody's home.
He knows pretty quickly something's not right here.
The next thing he hears is, "Get down."
Two males then came out wearing dark clothing, hoodies. One of the men had a gun.
Josh says the women ran past the attackers out of the apartment.
The girls are gone, and Mark and Chris start to tussle with the bad guys over the gun.
Josh says he then heard gunshots.
Shots are fired. He sees his two friends go down. Josh, he immediately drops to the floor.
He feels someone rambling around in his pockets, pulling them out, getting his money, getting his wallet.
He's begging for his life.
Then he heard one of the suspects yell, "We gotta go." And they ran out of the apartment.
When he thinks it's safe, he looks up, looks around, and that's when he discovers the bodies of his two friends lying next to him.
Josh knew he was their only chance to survive.
Says, "Hey, I'm gonna go get help."
Luckily, the attackers hadn't taken his cell phone. He immediately called 911 and went outside to wait for police.
This was a shocking event to him. He lost two of his friends. He told us that he felt like he was lured. This was essentially an armed robbery gone bad.
Police know they need to find the perpetrators as soon as possible. They asked Josh if he can provide a description of the assailants and the two women he met at the bar.
He said Darshell was 5'10", so very tall.
He did remember that she had on a red floral printed dress.
Josh described the other woman, Rolanda, as the smaller of the two.
As far as the males who had actually done the robbing and shooting. He had a very vague description: dark clothing, hoodies.
Even though detectives only have first names for the female suspects, they still try running a search in their system. And when they do, they're in luck.
They actually come across a traffic report from the day before the shooting.
The report names two women, 21-year-old Darshell Arnold and 21-year-old Rolanda Fripp.
Darshell Arnold's car got stopped by one of our patrol officers because it had a expired tag.
Rolanda, she actually was driving Darshell's car and got a ticket.
Due to state law, the officer had no choice but to impound the vehicle.
In Georgia, if your tag is 6 months expired, they can impound your vehicle and issue you a very hefty fine.
Aside from the traffic incident, both young women have squeaky clean records.
These were good girls. They didn't have a criminal history or anything.
So how did two seemingly good girls get mixed up in a double homicide? And why? Detectives would soon uncover a desperate plot that pushed one woman over the edge.
We have a young woman here who is willing to risk it all in the name of love.
Detectives in Marietta, Georgia, are investigating a double homicide that appears to have been a robbery gone terribly wrong. The surviving victim, Josh McCarter, has told police that he and his friends were lured to be robbed by two women they met at a bar.
When Rolanda and Darshell led Joshua into the abandoned apartment, he immediately knew something was wrong. And the next thing he hears is, "Get down."
He thought that it was a setup, and he was absolutely right.
Thanks to a traffic report from the day before, detectives believe they have identified the two female suspects as Darshell Arnold and Rolanda Fripp.
They got pulled over because of a suspended license plate.
Armed with the women's full names, detectives call Josh to see if he recognizes images of the two suspects.
They asked him to check their social media pages to see if they were the girls involved in a robbery.
Josh tells them, without a doubt, those are the two girls.
With their identities confirmed, detectives search for the last known addresses of the two women. And what they discover is shocking.
They lived in the same apartment complex where the murder happened.
Detectives immediately head back over to the apartment complex to speak with Darshell and Rolanda. But when they knock on the door, a young man answers.
He identifies himself as Jarvis Butts, Darshell's boyfriend.
He says he lives at the apartment with Darshell, their baby, and Rolanda's boyfriend, Joseph.
Detectives suspect that Jarvis and Joseph could be the two men responsible for the shooting that their girlfriends helped carry out.
They didn't really have any evidence against the guys, but they did have solid evidence against Darshell and Rolanda.
When Detective Moeller glances inside the apartment, she spots even more evidence against Darshell.
I look down and I see a red dress.
Josh mentioned that Darshell had been wearing a red and white floral dress.
Detectives ask Jarvis for his girlfriend's whereabouts.
I said, "Hey, is Darshell here?" And he said, "Yeah, she is."
Jarvis calls for Darshell, and within moments, she approaches the door.
When they first encounter her, she seems nervous.
Detectives tell Darshell she's under arrest for felony murder and armed robbery.
Because the descriptions that McCarter gave, we were able to have a suspect in custody.
She was shaking, visibly shaking. She just immediately starts crying, and I was like, okay, here we go.
Detectives don't have enough evidence to arrest Jarvis, but they ask him to come with them to the
No.
station for questioning.
Surprisingly, he agrees. He's actually pretty cooperative.
As for Rolanda Fripp and Joseph Brown, detectives put out an APB for the young couple.
Rolanda and Joseph aren't home, and they don't know where they are.
It's becoming increasingly obvious that all these people are implicated in this murder.
When detectives sit down with Darshell, she immediately shuts down any hopes for a confession.
I would like to go ahead and speak with the lawyer because I know I didn't do anything.
She doesn't want to tell them anything. She's not going to answer any of their questions.
It was frustrating, and it was disappointing.
With Darshell remaining tight-lipped, detectives turn to her boyfriend, Jarvis.
I'm not in the rush right now. Right now, you're being detained. We're just continuing our investigation.
To their surprise, he's much more forthcoming than Darshell.
He knows it's hot, the cops are on to him, and he's in survival mode.
Jarvis explains he and Darshell needed some quick cash, so she came up with a plan.
The plan was that Darshell and Rolanda would go to a sports bar, meet some men, flirt a little bit, have a good time, and convince them that they were going to go back to Darshell's apartment.
Instead, they were going to lure them to the abandoned unit in the apartment complex, and then Jarvis and Joseph were going to jump out and rob them.
Jarvis said initially it seemed like everything was going as planned.
She called me and told me that we found somebody with some money.
But according to Jarvis, everything went wrong when Joseph pulled out a gun.
Just supposed to be like an evening. Joseph brought the gun, so keep the static down. It didn't go the way that we wanted it to.
Jarvis lays blame for the murders entirely on Joseph.
Jarvis is saying, I didn't pull the trigger. It wasn't me.
Dude get shot. Real his pockets. I went out the door. I didn't shoot him. I didn't want to be stopped. Like, I had nothing to do with him getting shot.
After Jarvis finishes telling his story, law enforcement immediately arrests him.
He felt like he didn't have any culpability because he wasn't the one that pulled the trigger. What they fail to realize is you're a party to the crime.
With Jarvis's statement in tow, detectives now feel confident they can get a confession out of Darshell. But when they interview her for a second time, she'll unveil a side to this case they didn't see coming.
Detectives were shocked that someone would go this far just to keep their man happy.
He pretty much could have done anything he wanted, and I do believe she would have been right there for him.
Marietta police have taken 21-year-old Darshell Arnold and her boyfriend, Jarvis Butts, into custody as suspects in a double homicide. When detectives first try to speak with Darshell, she remains tight-lipped.
She shut down, and it seemed that it wasn't necessarily entirely just protect herself, that it was also protecting Jarvis.
But now, with Jarvis's statement in tow, they feel like they have a better chance of making her talk.
Jarvis was actually pretty forthcoming with information.
Jarvis makes it sound like Darshell. She's the whole mastermind behind this operation.
Jarvis puts her name in it right away.
Jarvis tells them it was supposed to be a robbery, it was supposed to be easy, and when the victim started fighting back, Joseph was the one who fired shots.
Jarvis's statement undeniably ties Darshell and their friends to the crime. But will she confirm or deny his allegations? When investigators present Darshell with Jarvis's statement, she looks defeated.
So the cops tell Darshell that they have a confession from Jarvis, and it's in your best interest to kind of look out for yourself right now because he doesn't have your back.
Darshell is obviously hurt by the news. She seems saddened and shocked that the love of her life, the father of her daughter, has just thrown her under the bus.
She was upset about her situation. She clearly realizes her current circumstances.
Darshell finally agrees to talk. She starts at the beginning, the day before the murders.
She and Rolanda were on their way home from getting groceries.
So Rolanda Fripp is the driver of the vehicle, but the car is registered to Darshell Arnold.
They were stopped by the city of Marietta because of an expired tag, and the vehicle was impounded.
According to Darshell, when she returned home to let Jarvis know what had happened, he was enraged.
He couldn't believe that she would let this happen.
They were already low on money. Now, how are they going to get to work without their car?
Jarvis tells her that it's her fault that the car has been impounded. So she's going to need to help him.
Darshell claims that's when they decided there was no other way to get the car back.
They came up with this plan to commit a robbery in order to get the money to get the car out of impound.
She loved Jarvis, and she couldn't stand the thought of him being upset with her. She wanted to do whatever she had to make things right.
Darshell admits they recruited Rolanda and Joseph to help out with the robbery scheme.
They also promised Joseph and Rolanda some of the money if they helped them do this robbery.
It was supposed to be the perfect plan. In and out, no one gets hurt.
Darshell says on the night of the robbery, she and Rolanda arrived at the bar around 11 p.m.
They quickly spotted a group of guys that looked like potential targets.
These guys, they were dressed really nice. They looked like the kind of guys who might have some money.
Darshell says that she flirted with the guys, and these three guys spent the rest of the night buying them drinks and flirting back.
Darshell tells detectives that the men were flashing large wads of cash throughout the evening.
They're having just a lot of fun, but in her mind, she's working. She's thinking of how to get the guys back to the apartment so that they can be robbed by the father of her child.
Around 12:30 a.m., Darshell and Rolanda convinced the men to leave the bar for their apartment, and Darshell called Jarvis with a heads up.
She calls him and says, "I'm bringing these guys. Get ready. We're on the way."
But when they got to the abandoned unit at the apartment complex, things didn't quite go according to plan.
She said the guys immediately jumped out and started yelling and fighting. It all happened so fast she couldn't keep up.
Darshell says once the fighting began, she and Rolanda ran.
As they were running away, they heard gunshots.
They quickly went back to their apartment and immediately changed clothes.
Detectives feel like their case is coming together. But when they finally track down Joseph and Rolanda, the couple will throw a whole new wrench into the case.
It's becoming a game of he said, she said. They had to find out who was telling the truth.
Marietta police have just questioned Darshell Arnold in connection with an armed robbery that left 2 men dead. Darshell claims she felt obligated to aid her boyfriend, Jarvis Butts, in the robbery after their car got impounded under her watch.
Her boyfriend, Mr. Butts, believed that she might be able to lure some victims back to this apartment so that they could have an easy score, an easy armed robbery, and get the money they needed to get on the vehicle and out of impound.
The responsibility is put on her. This is our car.
Detectives are still trying to locate the couple's alleged co-conspirators, Rolanda Fripp and Joseph Brown. In the meantime, investigators conduct a search of the apartment where the two couples lived.
There's clothing scattered all over the apartment, on the floor, draped over furniture. We started picking up on some of the clothing that had been described to us by the surviving victim.
The surviving victim, Josh McCarter, had described to police that the male suspects were wearing dark hoodies.
The hoodies stood out from the rest of the clothing.
Police also find a safe under one of the beds.
We shake the safe, it's locked, and we hear something thud in there. The first thing that we thought is we had a gun, which is really good if we could find the murder weapon in this apartment.
Officers open the safe. There is no gun, but there are other objects equally as damning.
They find items that belong to the victims.
We have found the identification card of Mr. McCarter and his wallet, as well as Christopher Jackson's ID card. I handled a wallet. I looked down and there was blood on my hands.
This evidence undeniably ties Darshell, her boyfriend, and their friends to the crime.
Now the police have this daunting task of trying to figure out where their friends are.
As detectives are preparing to leave the scene, they get even more good news.
Officers had found Joseph and Rolanda, and they actually had them in custody.
Detectives race back to the station to interview the couple. They sit down with Rolanda Fripp first. But if detectives are going to get Rolanda to talk, it won't be easy.
She had a very rough demeanor. There was no remorse in her actions. She didn't care what happened.
Detectives try to elicit some emotion out of Rolanda to get her to open up.
Look at this. There's some pictures. Look at that. That's the guy you were partying with all night.
Yeah.
Dead. Ain't coming back. Dead. Look at that. Gone. I had to go tell his mama he's dead. Do you know how much that sucks?
They show her a picture, and at that point she just goes to pieces.
Walked in the apartment. I ran. I was scared. I didn't want to get shot.
She says nobody was supposed to be hurt, nobody was supposed to die, nobody was supposed to have a gun in the first place.
I did not want to get shot.
Rolanda puts it all on Darshell and Jarvis. She says this was Darshell and Jarvis's plan. They came up with all of it.
Rolanda says once the car was impounded, Jarvis was ready to do anything to get it back. And he knew Darshell would help him.
She said that Darshell would do almost anything Jarvis asked her to do.
Rolanda claims Darshell helped Jarvis convince her and Joseph to participate in the robbery.
They were going to get part of the money.
The girls heard the shots fired as they were outside. So as far as actually witnessing who pulled the trigger, I don't think that they did.
Detectives need to get to the bottom of who really fired the fatal shots that night. When they sit down with Joseph, they hope they'll get the answers they've been looking for.
All I know is when we went in there, we came out, and all I heard was some boom.
Police have 4 people in custody for a robbery turned murder that killed 2 young men. They believe Darshell Arnold and her boyfriend, Jarvis Butts, devised the plan and enlisted the help of their 2 friends, Rolanda Fripp and Joseph Brown.
They committed the act, which involved 2 murders, and then they tried to conceal it afterwards. All as a group.
Jarvis has pointed the finger at Joseph Brown for pulling the trigger. But what will Joseph say? When detectives finally sit down with Joseph, they tell him about the evidence they have against him.
They have 3 different people who placed him at the scene. Jarvis said he saw him shoot and kill 2 of the victims.
Joseph admits to the robbery, but claims he didn't shoot anyone.
See, because they wanted me to get in on it with the robbing thing.
Joseph is claiming that he's not the shooter. That's his story. He's sticking to it.
So what happened? Who did it?
Jarvis shot.
Well, you're clearly naming you as the trigger man.
Jarvis shot them people.
Detectives now have statements from all 4 suspects, but they still need to figure out who's telling the truth. Luckily, they have one person who may be able to help.
We did have the benefit of Joshua Carter, who could share what he remembers from inside the apartment itself. That's something we don't always have in homicide investigations.
The next day, detectives meet with Josh McCarter.
They sit down with him and they show him a lineup of photos, including those of Jarvis and Joseph.
Detectives ask Josh if he can identify the shooter from the night of the robbery.
He confirms he recognizes both men, but he points to Joseph as the shooter.
Detectives have finally identified the man who fired the fatal shots. All 4 suspects are charged with felony murder and armed robbery. But Jarvis Butts is the only defendant who decides to take his chances at trial.
Jarvis was found guilty at trial, and he got 2 life sentences, plus an additional 20 years. Joseph Brown pled guilty as the trigger man, and he received 2 life sentences for felony murder. Rolanda pleaded guilty to manslaughter and armed robbery. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison and 10 years probation.
As for Darshell, the good girl that got caught up in this bad situation for love, she is sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole.
She has to serve 30 years, and then maybe she's up for parole. She's going to be 51 years old.
After the sentencing, Darshell's daughter went to live with Jarvis's mother.
Not only do we have victims who are taken away from their families, but now you have a mother and a father committing this crime and are spending their life in prison. And now that child is being raised by grandma. There are no winners in these kind of cases. Everybody loses.
The sad part to me is just how senseless it was. You've got 3 buddies that just went out to have a good time. None of them had any idea going into this night that this was going to have such fatal consequences.
No one understands how a young woman with such promise like Darshell could get caught up in such a reckless scheme.
It didn't seem to be in Darshell's character to be involved with the murder. She's a mother, so she's a giver. She takes care of the people around her.
I certainly think that she was influenced, but I also think that she felt like she needed to go along with it.
She wanted to please the love of her life, Jarvis. This love, this desire to have a better life didn't go as planned.
In a young woman's mind, a lot of times that man becomes their world, like the whole center of their universe. So whatever he says, she'll do it.
The love of family can wrap you in a warm embrace and feel like a shimmering light. But when that love turns toward darkness, it can cast a devouring shadow that draws you into danger. And once you're in its grip, there's no escape.